Hello, everyone. I meant to make this car talk where I was going to drive on the way home and talk about this, but I actually forgot my microphone. So I'm actually back here out the house. It's actually like 8:50 at night. So I'm actually pretty tired. I've not been sleeping the best recently. So yeah, good times. But one thing that I need to bring up on the real podcast here shortly, that I've been wanting to talk a little bit about is basically kind of, I don't know how to put it, right? I guess maybe like conflicts of interests is something that I think is kind of an interesting and very hard thing to think about when you are talking about games. The reason this is coming up right now is, if you did not know, there is a group, I believe they're called PC Engine Works, something like that, and they make repro PC Engine physical copies, because PC Engine games can get expensive, and actually getting a real physical copy of a game can be challenging. And if you don't mind it not be like it being a repro, then whatever. There is a fairly, I think there's a market for repros. But maybe is not the biggest market, right? I think the big thing is that repros are clearly marked as such, which has always been kind of an iffy thing in the past, right? So recently there was a PCFX repro that was announced, and I need to talk about it on the podcast still because it is something that I should talk about on the podcast. However, I initially hesitated because what they did with the PCFX repro is they included the Welcome to Pia Carrot fan translation on a disc, and apparently did not, take the time to essentially go out of their way to get any kind of rights or anything like that for Welcome to Pia Carrot. And I happen to know the person, Filler, who's been on the past podcasts and stuff, who has worked on that project, and he confirmed, or worked on that English translation, confirmed to me that he was not inquired to about it or whatever. I actually did reach out to the PC Engine Works guy a little bit, and he kind of gave me a response that more or less was just like, I get why people would be upset, but. And this is not exact quoting, this is just me like summing it up real quick. But if he wants to basically make people happy and make like a really professional looking, reproduction, which I understand that. And like and the kind of the silly thing about all this is that like everything he's doing otherwise is just like the stock game, right? This is the one fan translation in there, and it's almost included as an afterthought. Everything else has a nice package and everything, where Welcome to Pia Carrot's just in like a paper sleeve. So it seemed like it would have been like way easier to just ignore that and like ignore any drama around that. But anyway, so he told me kind of his perspective on it, and basically saying that, he doesn't mind annoying like a single person without like, but doesn't like, he doesn't mind annoying a single person if it makes other people happy, which I don't necessarily agree with. And personally, this is why I was so hesitant to talk about it on the podcast. I don't really want to highlight it that much. Because I'm just like, I don't really want people to go buy this thing that uses stolen work. But there's a couple different facets to this, because I think it is a reality. And again, I'll be talking about this on the main podcast to some degree, so I don't think I'm just hiding this behind the paywall. It's just this happens to be where I'm going to talk about this first and foremost, and probably more in depth than on the podcast, honestly. This will be more of a news story in the podcast, the real podcast. But more than anything, the fact that I knew Filler and knew he worked on it, and have at least somewhat of a personal relationship with him. I always hesitate to say friends with people that I work with online, so I won't say that. But I've worked with him off and on PCFX stuff for a while, and like it really was probably one of the first times I really sat there with like a fan translation and had to make that decision of like, do I cover this thing because somebody else I know is hurt by this kind of thing. And it's a little hard to it can be hard to know what you should disclose and when frequently. So like if I were to do a Welcome to Pia Carrot review or some kind of video on it, At least my expectation at this moment in thinking about this would be that I would at least mention that, hey, I know the translator, so just as a heads up on that. And I believe in a couple of other instances on other videos, I have mentioned, at least in the description, which it probably should be more obvious, about like, hey, I've had companies that I've done videos on in the past that I've had at my current company, completely ungaming related, have had clients or prospects with. Like, we've worked with some companies like in a way that was, close for business reasons outside of, working on, anything that's gaming related, just as an office related thing, essentially. And it's one of those things that I have on the website, a list of gaming related contacts I've had with companies. I've also had the CEO of Inti Creates buy me a hamburger once at Red Robin. Long story about that. I was more or less just a guy that was around at the time, and was just in connection to somebody else he was hanging out with, basically. So I try to list those things on the website, but it can be hard to know when you disclose that. Even sometimes where I make a video about something or I talk about something online, and it can like ruffle some feathers of some people later on, and or it could potentially be, if I were to be a bit more like, depending on the type of video it was, if it didn't really go into like what the game was that much, and wasn't as critical, like it might be harder to. I might take a moment to think about, like, if I do a follow-up video, like, actually, what will this person think if I do that? And with the company, it's a lot easier for that. But when you're dealing with, like, a creator specifically, and you have this kind of, like, relationship that may or may not be friendly or not, like, the manga Scum of the Brave, which is also a visual novel, like, light novel kind of thing, I really kind of wanted to make a video about Scum of the Brave. And I had just had enough interactions with the original artist in a way, and I was like a very distinct English language voice on the internet about it, that it made me kind of take a moment and think, like, do I want to actually do this? Not because I think I would be influenced. A lot of the times with this stuff, it's not because I'm sitting there like actively thinking about being influenced. It's that you kind of realize later on that, like, oh, the reason I made this decision may have been related to this kind of thing. And I think I did not end up making a Scum of the Brave video because I ultimately never really made a decision about how I would handle that, because it would be very visible to her, and I'd have to make sure, that like, or I don't have to make sure, but like it would definitely put me in a position that I wouldn't want to necessarily be in like criticizing somebody's game that I know, especially in a different language, right? That might not be understood. It's something that came up with the Otokadol review as well, where like with Otokadol, the guy who helped me get the footage for that, I think he was not fond of my review because I had moments in that review where I was critical of the game. And when I finished the review, he sent me a follow-up message that seemed very, I guess you could say, like, what would be the best way to put it? Like, it seemed very, like, hey, you just don't understand this aspect of a game or something like that. And not like you don't understand the language, but like, well, this isn't meant to be like the perfect game or something, which is never like what you intend to be. But sometimes you just, when you're talking about a game, especially in a review fashion, and a game like that nobody really knows about, I think it's important to talk about those aspects of the game that are not, great. And I think he ultimately was a little teed off that I was not like just 100% positive on it. Not teed off, I don't know, but it seemed like he wanted to convey to me that he thought how I approached the review was not amazing at times, and I really think it just comes down to being a little negative on certain things. 'Cause I love Otokadol, right? I love that game so much, and I'm probably going to be one of the most positive voices on the English-speaking internet about it, I think. Usually the common complaints about Otokadol are the difficulty level, but like I think in most of the cases of Otokadol, like I always had like, this is a problem, but like there is something else here that, yes, this game has a restriction in place because of it, but also it has that restriction can amount to something, right? And to making a consistent tone. There's not a lot of music variety in a Toku-Doll, but it creates a consistent sound to that game. Even when you go between genres, a Toku-Doll music sounds like a Toku-Doll music, right? And that comes down to the fashion elements too. There's not nearly as much variety in a Toku-Doll versus like an Aikatsu, but it's not trying to be that, right? But if you're looking at this game through the lens of those other types of like idle dance games in arcades, I think it's going to be obvious that that part is missing. But the important thing is like noting that and then explaining why it doesn't matter or why it gives the game a different benefit to it, right? I think that is like an important thing there. And so there's those situations that like I wonder if I knew about his kind of reservations about me speaking positively about the game ahead of time, if I knew that, like, would that have affected how I talked about the game? So it's one of those things that, like, I always want to be as honest as possible with this kind of stuff. And I think everybody does, right? And, like, there's no one true objective human being, right? That is just not possible. And you try your best. You know, I came from the journalism field, or journalism school at least, and all I can say is that you try your best. You try to listen to everybody, you know, make sure you compare things and do your best to look at it, and be respectful of you know, not only the person who made it, but also your audience, and making sure they understand, you know, like you want to make sure that you are conveying everything you feel about this game, and stuff. But I kind of lost the thread there. But basically all I was saying was, you know, it's a messy situation frequently. And the more you get involved in the stuff and the more like niche things you kind of interact with, kind of the messier it becomes in some ways. Especially if you start working with somebody on something where, maybe they're not even the creator of it, but maybe they have an invested interest in, like, they feel very positively about this thing, but you feel very negatively or something, and that might like create a conflict there. But you know, it's just one of those things that are challenging. I think the best thing you can do is just be as open as you can about it. So yeah, it's just things like that over time that you just like realize when you're covering games, like, oh, this happened here, this happened there. And at the end of the day, like, how much does it really matter? You know, as I didn't like, I didn't take any paychecks on the table. The most like money, well, not even money, the most I've gotten from that kind of thing is that hamburger at Red Robin. And I was completely like, they had no idea who I was. They didn't know I was making content on the internet. This was like 7 years ago at this point. It's been forever. Like, I love and he creates either way. But like, yeah, it's just like stuff like that. It can be hard when you're just like mingling within the space and that stuff starts to overlap a bit, kind of thing. So it's interesting, for that. The one thing that I think, and this actually is not what this podcast was supposed to be about. Like, I just kind of got off at a tangent there, which this is what these bonus podcasts are. They're the ultimate tangent. I don't even edit these at all. I barely edit the main podcast, but this I'm literally not editing. But the thing I want to also touch a little bit on with the PC Engine Works things, that PCFX repro set that I thought about, is like, I think I feel a lot less sympathy for companies. Again, this kind of comes back to the individual versus a company at times, where you know, the fact that they pirated a bunch of, you know, games from the PCFX and copied a bunch of artwork and all that stuff, I really don't care about that stuff, because I get the feeling that the company involved like does not care anymore. And like, if like maybe legally in court, if they're asked the question, sure, they would say, yes, we care. But, you know, nobody at Konami cares about what's happening with Kishin Zenki on the PCFX. They're not gonna like, and if they did, they have the resources to chase that down, right? They have the money to chase down PC Engine Works and put them out of business. They're not going to. They may not even be aware that it exists, but even if they were aware, you know, I think they'd just look at it and be like, okay, well, you're not selling our Kishin Zenki pachinko machines, right? I shouldn't make that joke. Konami's more than just like pachinko machine company. I think that's one frustration I have when I hear about Konami on podcasts and stuff. I was actually listening to the Giant Bombcast, and they mentioned about how Konami doesn't make video games anymore. And I understand why they say that, because what you expect from Konami from a Western market in the home console space is very different than what they're putting out today. Admittedly, you know, I don't expect the world to know about Solomon Program, but you do have like the Super Bomberman games, right? You have the various arcade releases that they're putting out still things like that. So, it's definitely on a smaller scale what they're doing, but they still continue to put out games. It's just not really in a space that's very visible to Americans typically, unfortunately, and not using the franchises that people would want them to be utilizing, right? So that kind of thing bothers me. But yeah, I don't think Konami cares, and I think most companies, and I would honestly think most creators would probably be more than happy if a company, or if people made that stuff more accessible, as long as it's not like something they personally own, right? I think it's a little different when you have personal ownership over something, and you're personally having that work taken away from you and being sold for a profit. And maybe I know other people will feel differently too, for sure. But I just think that when you look at a company like Konami, if they really wanted to defend themselves, they have the assets to do so. So I have no real beef if they're just going to let that fly under the radar and not care, essentially. So admittedly, again, I don't know if they even know about it, but I don't think, I highly doubt Konami cares. I'm pretty sure Nintendo knows people can pirate and put WiiWare games on a Wii these days, but nobody cares at Nintendo about that unless you ask them in court, right? So I think that's an interesting line between talking about it on a personal level versus like a corporate level kind of thing. So anyways, that's all I really have to say, I think, about that, just kind of scattered thoughts about that. So I'll be talking about this a little bit on the main podcast, specifically around the PCFX stuff. But it is something that I always, pretty consistently think about, and it's really hard to figure out where you draw the line on that stuff, and then also how you convey that stuff to people without coming off as super saying all the time, hey, like Disney, I used to have Disney as a company I worked with 7 years ago, right? And it's just okay, whatever at this point. But I do think, generally I try to, if I have some kind of vested interest in something, at the very least, I will convey that at the beginning of the video, or at least try to convey that somewhere. Admittedly, that's not been as much of a thing. And sometimes I forget. The Pokemon company was a company of ours at one point, a customer of ours. And whenever I talk about Pokemon, I do not say that. I think it's on the website though. I think it's in the website disclosure section. I don't say that. But honestly, though, I think I'm probably one of the, I don't know, I'm maybe not the most negative person about Pokemon on the internet. I'm somebody who does not care about Pokemon, so it's easy for me to be dismissive of it. I think whenever somebody comes out and has a very extreme stance on something, though, that's where I end up on the other side of it. And in recent years, people have been pretty hard on Pokemon, particularly from the graphics front, as well as the stability front, glitches, things like that. And I think I have become a lot more sympathetic towards Pokemon because of that. Because when I look at Pokemon, I don't think they're great looking games, but I think they get the point across. I think they do what they need to do, and they're working with hardware to really optimize. And they don't have that long experience with 3D graphics like other companies do. But it has been 10 years since they started making 3D video games, so probably should be getting things put back together quickly. But at the same time, they haven't made a lot of HD games, right? Which the whole 360/PS3 generation was a bunch of companies struggling to make games in HD in a lot of ways. So it's definitely one of those things that I definitely, when I start hearing people being very negative about something, I become a lot more attentive to it, and I also become a lot more sympathetic to the other side typically. But anyways, that's all I'm gonna say though. I don't know if that was anything, but here's my voice and you heard me say it. I'm a little tired right now, so I'm a little rambly at the moment. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Again, if you joined the Patreon and you're listening to this, thank you so much for joining the Patreon. I really appreciate it. I am still trying to figure out how to best push the Patreon, as well as kind of fine tune when content will be coming out and what features and how to request information from people. So I'll be trying to post that stuff up when I can, and hopefully get in some kind of groove, but not get in a monotonous kind of thing. I don't want to record something just because I feel the need to record it, right? I want to make sure the stuff I'm putting on Patreon, if I feel like doing something, I have the flexibility to try something new rather than just stick with, hey, I'm going to do a podcast, hey, I'm going to do article reading, all that fun stuff. So anyways, that's it. Thanks for coming. Bye.